I said, because third time's a charm, we're gonna
Yeah.
save this bad boy. I see it recording. Do you see it recording on your end?
I do not.
You see a little red dot? Oh, I see a little red dot.
Well, I think that's what matters.
That's what matters. Well,
Make sure that
back.
this is the case. Yeah.
I should have just made you the straight up co-host every single time, like the hidden co-host. That's the inspiration for everything behind the scenes, because we keep meeting behind the scenes. So we're going to go straight into this recap real quick. We had been talking about our Men of Empowerment series and how we are looking into yoga as this new paradigm, and also seeing the marginalization within the communities of yoga, and how we want to create this brave space, or this space of being supported in an environment where a lot of men or male identified community members have been feeling a little bit more vulnerable, being more vocal about their vulnerability, and then also looking for areas of opportunity where they can find community. And we've spoken to some great men about some of their ways, how yoga has inspired them, how yoga has inspired you. We've talked on spiritual bypass, which I wanted to circle back to today. So I wanted to just kind of give you the platform so that you can take it away by just reintroducing yourself, and then also around the fire as one of these bases of support that you offer. And then we can dive into how yoga has helped you on your journey with your relationships, and then how you've come across the spiritual bypass.
Yeah.
Take it away, Zach.
Well, first of all, like, I think, and even just the acknowledgement of speaking about this whole subject and really using inclusive language and saying male identified is really the start to all of this. Because I think one of the questions that we explored last time was just kind of talking about the barrier for men to practice yoga in the context of the dominant culture of the US. And I really think the obstacle that's there is it's because of how we engender as a culture and as a society. And so in speaking of that, in just the broad spectrum of gender and all of its ways that we can explore our individual identity within the collective experience of being human, I think that we can start to use this conversation and start to move from that into other ways that we might be unintentionally kind of just participating and proliferating old paradigms. And I think that's where, like, the largest obstacle is to this in the context of those who identify as men, and also just in other ways that maybe we're not even aware of at this time. And so I don't know where to go from there, but yeah, maybe direct me.
Absolutely. No, I think this is great that you're bringing this up, because gender has been an issue, and then being associated with being too feminine, and then coming from backgrounds and cultural backgrounds of stoic perspectives or ways of being. So when people embrace coming into a yoga studio, what was that journey or that experience like for you, maybe from your personal experience, from how you're finding yourself more in tune or in touch with your feminine side? Mitchell Blyer said in the other interview just the other day, he said, which is, I loved it, that we essentially are our mother's DNA. Like, we are all made of our mother's DNA. So we are all already in touch with our divine feminine. Like, we all have it in us. It's in our divine makeup. So just having those cultural kind of barriers put in place, I guess you can say. Also, I almost want to lead this to a space where maybe even that, because of these cultural barriers and because of the way that we've been raised, that the male identified community and those that identify with that Marlboro Man type of visual identity role versus someone who is softer, more of like a Zach Jenkins type of approach, you know, to this kind of role, and how that person enters into a yoga space, right? When someone looks at Zach Jenkins walking into a yoga space, they're like, oh, that's my people, right? And it's just like a stereotype. It happens he's a lot yoga, he walks like Jesus, you know, whatever. And then you've got maybe someone like Dan Nevins, who's a combat veteran, and he may walk in and you won't even think twice. He teaches yoga all over the world, but just because of the way the demeanor is, you might not think twice of him actually doing the class. And so do you feel like those types of stereotypes have created some boundaries and limitations in the male identified community as to why their approach to yoga is different? Or does it just stem back to marketing?
It's a good question. I think that, like that all stems to like such an individual identity, which is why it's always important to just be aware of the fact that what we define as masculine or feminine is all culturally inscribed. And so we can go back to different cultures and different places or cultures at different times and find what might be considered feminine or masculine is different. And this is something that that like to each of us, like to each person who identifies as a man, and how we show that identity to the world is such an empowering choice, right? And this is where I think this conversation, it moves, like yoga can be a great vehicle for it, but it moves to so many other aspects, because the way that dominant culture inscribes masculinity and teaches that, conditions that to men, is often very limiting to how they can express their identity. And I think that moves into a whole nother conversation of, well, how does that feeling of lack of expression inhibit emotional development, or how does the suppression of feeling, since feeling is something that is usually not in our culture considered to be a more masculine trait. So to feel the pressure of to be a man, so to speak, to not feel, like what does that do? And I think that's what moves us into like mental health and all of these factors that just ultimately, in the context of yoga, we could talk about in creating and perpetuating suffering. And I think both for the individual, and then also from that suffering, how is that karma like reflected out into the world? So it all comes back down to those samskaras around that identity and around expression. And it can be really difficult. I know in my experience of my journey in my practice, unfortunately we went into this all in the last meeting that didn't get recorded, but
it's okay. You can say it again and we'll record it now. How
yeah, I'll
that?
Say it again. It's a whole
fine
thing of feeling like I'm repeating myself, but I guess I will. Like in my journey, I really found the practice of yoga while I was attending university. I was studying English literature. So it came in at a time in my life where I was studying gender. I was studying feminism. I was studying, multicultural perspectives on things and the analysis of storytelling, which really, from an interest point of view, like paralleled the study of yoga, both in an academic setting and then also outside of the academic setting in yoga classes, and then going and living at the Omega Institute for 6 months, and then traveling to India and living in an ashram. So there was this thread that connected all of that. But one thing that I was surprised about leaving an academic setting and going into kind of a more spiritual community setting in the United States was the rigidity around gender and the rigidity around how we express our identity through our gender and just the stereotypes that are there. And even after that, I remember going to teach at a place at the Omega Institute. I'll say the name. And
no harm. We love with
yeah,
all
there's
love.
no harm.
Nothing but love.
Not Omega. It's
just the experience.
That it happened at.
Just the housing.
And I taught a class. It was on Mother's Day, and I taught a class that really was theming around like the goddess, in particular. In this case, it was Lakshmi and abundance was like really the focus that I was working on. And you've been to my classes, so you know, like a big thing of the structure of the class is really like embodying that theme, and it's almost like going on kind of a story journey with it. Yes. So at one point we were embodying this goddess and like really trying to embody what she represents, like embody that symbolism, because whether I identify as a man or not, like I can connect to that, right? We can all connect to that because it's all a part of each of us.
Right.
It's all a part of existence. And after the class, a man in the practice came up to me and made a comment about like, well, you know, maybe next week we can do this, or like there was some shame in that was being expressed in like in engaging with the goddess, so to speak. And
sorry about the noise in the background. I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right.
I don't even know what's going on over there. So sorry.
I'm sure one of my cats at some point is gonna come up in here. But yeah, I felt in that moment it took pause. Like, how can we communicate that it's all right to connect to those feelings? It's all right to connect what might be described as more feminine or might be described as more masculine. How can we let each of ourselves like be who we are in that spectrum? And in a yoga practice, like we talked about this in our last meeting, so again I'm repeating myself, but in a yoga practice, like the yoga that we know of, the asana that we practice today, if we trace it back to Krishnamacharya, it was something that was created for boys to grow into men along this spiritual practice. And of course, in the United States today, we might see like many more women than men. We might see that there are these obstacles that I think like the only way to explore it is like one by one, case by case, and really see what comes up, because it's gonna be incredibly individual of that person's journey of why they might feel that they're not allowed into a space, or that perhaps they don't deserve to do this work, or layers of shame around just allowing ourselves to feel. And each, like I said, each of those journeys is different. So around the fire is a space that's specifically made for that, for those who identify as men, but for whatever reason might feel that like they can't express in that way, or maybe it's more difficult to express in that way because of different cultures. And the whole background of all of those identities there are going to be in different places on that spectrum. And the idea around the fire is that we learn from one another. by just holding space together, listening to each other's stories. The way that we do that through Around the Fire is it's broken down by different elemental symbols. And even in that way, like those symbols, we each have a relationship with it. So there might be some broad, like cultural strokes growing up in similar cultures that we can say like, oh, earth to many of us might represent this, or air might represent this. But in giving just the space to work through a meditative practice, maybe start off in those more general symbolic connotations, and then have a space, but like, what does it mean to you? Like, what is this? And then also working in that way of perhaps letting go of ideas around our gender and our identity that might not be serving who we are, that might not be serving our journey, and to perhaps create space for some newer ones that feel authentic to each of us. And so that's really something that I think is important, because each of us, and this is, we can talk about it in the context of male identification, but it's really just in the context of all of our identities. Like the expression that we have of our identity is so particular, it's so individual, and it's so powerful when we give ourselves that space to truly be in it, I believe. To choose what you want to do, to choose what you want to wear, to choose how you want to present yourself. And I think even just thinking of it in that way, like I might be kind of going stream of consciousness here a little bit, but
fine, you're fine. I love it.
But like looking at, like, I have a beard, I have long hair. I think that I remember like studying, again, going back to that academic sense, like studying gender. And I remember having this light bulb moment of like thinking about how I choose to physically present myself. And I had never really thought of that before. Like it seems like a weird thing to say, but I had never really thought of making the conscious choice of presenting myself in a certain way. Like growing up, I went to high school at an all boys Catholic school. It was a Christian Brothers school. It was, there's many great things from it. Like I loved my experience there looking back on it. I think especially being a Christian Brothers school is like a little bit more liberal and free than like a, you know, maybe a more archdiocesan school. But yeah, like I got exposed to guided meditation in that space from a Christian brother, from one of the brothers, and it was really great. But we had dress codes, and our hair was supposed to be a certain way, and so there's all these conditions of like, this is the way that you have to be. You have to present yourself in this way to be a respectable man. And perhaps it was from that where I realized like, oh no, I want my hair to grow long. I want to have a beard in this way. But even still, I noticed there's tendency sometimes for me to start limiting myself and thinking like, oh no, like I'm just letting it go. Like, it's just, this is how I am. And it's like, no, this is on some level, whether I want to admit it or not, there's a conscious decision that I might be hiding myself from, but a part of myself is choosing this. And in just allowing the space to be like, no, I choose to wear this. I choose to, you know, wear like jewelry or something. Like all of these things are often from the view of dominant culture, not considered masculine. Mm-hmm. And therefore, in the realm of identifying as a man, taboo in some way. Mm-hmm. And so like I said, maybe a little stream of consciousness there, but I think it reflects back to a yoga studio where I remember when I first started teaching yoga, I encountered somebody who was teaching a men's like intro course to yoga, and it was delving like mostly with asana. And I talked to the teacher, and they had said that it was meant for like men's bodies, to give a space for men to move in a way that's more comfortable for their bodies. And again, going back to like what I said, like the whole practice actually started out very geared towards men's bodies. Like that was the intention. And I think a lot of what might be limiting even just men in a traditional context in our culture from moving in some of these ways, or being intimidated by some of the movements, it's up here because of what they're told. Like, oh, men are not supposed to move in that way. Even just from an exercise angle, it's like, no, you have to be lifting weights or doing this or doing that, which that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure that can hold people from truly giving themselves the space to be, to speak, to move, and to feel into who they are, and and this is where I think it's important from a yogic perspective to observe how who they are changes over time as well, because it's not a static thing. And that's like the powerful thing, I think, of identity in general, is it's like, it's something that we can pour into any given container and allow ourselves to be there, but we also have to have the freedom to like maybe move it between containers too, so it doesn't get stagnant in one place, to give ourselves the space to change. Yeah, like in there's all kinds of obstacles that are individual, but I think like, how do we move past it? We just give that space. Just give that space.
I'm curious about holding space, because holding space has been a kind of like a new catchphrase in the yoga community, almost, where we are embodying space, we're holding space, we're being in this moment, we're creating a space, we're holding this environment.
Yeah.
I say it all the time. We all say it, right? And really it comes down to like what really truly is holding space. How do we
so important.
You know, how are we holding the space? And I know from one of my brothers, he had an unfortunate situation happen with a family member passing, and we were in an environment where you can really see what it was like to hold space. We sat quiet in a circle. He went off and let all of the emotions out. And there wasn't a moment of like comforting or holding or anything like that. It was a space where the soul was able to just release. And in that moment, it was, you could almost feel a sense of calm amongst the others that were there for this one man. And he felt so held without being held. I almost want to say that is what's cultivated when you go to a yoga class. I think it goes beyond the Shakti pot, and for those of you that are going to watch this and hear this Shakti pot, what the hell is that? It from our yoga world and talk and stuff. It's this energy, it's this feminine energy, it's this nourishing energy that we share when you're around a bunch of people, which is why you like to go and be in a class environment, or why people like to be around people in a festival, because of that energy that's flowing, right? Everyone's on kind of like on the same vibe. That bob is what we call it. And so in Zach's class and Zach's experiences, sound healing ceremonies, or cacao ceremonies that I want you to talk about, these environments around the fire, you create a very nourishing environment where you have a space that is this holding of space, almost like this embodiment that Mitchell Blyer said, you don't control the space. You walk in and you're there to consciously listen and really just be there. So can you speak to how that holding space consciously comes out for you?
Definitely. I do think it's important to like really break down this phrase, because it is an often used phrase, like actually in Unintentional Community, which is that pilot episode that my buddy and I created. We had a whole joke about holding space, because I've been in communities where it gets said to the point that like it becomes absolutely meaningless. And so taking the time to just break it down and be like, well, what are we talking about is so important. So I'll start it off grounded in Around the Fire, because the first Around the Fire I did was a workshop that was offered at the Omega Institute, New York. And I co-taught that with a good friend of mine, Justin Ramdas Logan. And when we were planning it out, we wanted to make sure that we had a ton of space for people to share and people to listen. But we also were trying to very consciously be aware of how do we set that up? How do we give it room to move, to be, while also like directed, staying within the confines of the intention at that points. We tried to learn really from experiences where maybe the space, that container, if you will, wasn't being held in the most skillful and compassionate way. And a lot of that was rooted in some men's groups that Justin Ramdas was a member of before, and just experiences that he shared. And then some experiences that I've had in some similar settings as well. And it revolved around, like, first of all, the direction we didn't want it to go was other people listening only to give advice, or listening to comfort in some way, or to solve. Those are all things that we felt come up, not just in settings of men, but unfortunately like come up in just settings of across the board, across just when people are there. And I think that the intention behind it's actually really beautiful. Like, we want to heal another, but the truth is none of us can heal anybody else, right? Any healing that we do emotionally, energetically, even physically, it comes from us. Not to say there aren't things that can't assist in that, of course. All those support things are there. So when we have a space, are we giving a space that's just there to listen, just to be present with another? And I think that's where it all starts, is how do we hold space in an effective way? We allow ourselves to be present with another. And when we have a group of people that are doing that, it's really powerful, because anytime that one of us can experience truly being listened to without the fear of judgment, without someone else like projecting their own experiences or narrative onto it, and just allowing ourselves to express, it's in that expression that we feel unburdened. So that's a powerful part of holding this space. I think as a facilitator, the way how we start to do that is by modeling that. And people follow. Like, I think there's this really cool thing of, again, in our mystery non-recorded meeting, like we talked about sound and this tendency that no matter how much musical training you have or not, when you hear somebody else make a sound, you're very inclined to like naturally either line up with that sound and sing that sound or tone that sound, or harmonize with it in some way, depending on like where your range is. And that's beautiful that like we have that tendency to do that. And
we hear that
likewise
a lot
in a group setting. Yeah, exactly. In a group setting, when you're facilitating, when you're initiating that holding of space, it's like everything's silent. If I were to just go like, well, I'm going to make a sound, but there's like something going on out there, so it might actually line up with that. So, yeah, it's like there's that there. There's that sound. There's that initiatory spark that's there. And then if you were to follow into that, you would likely be in tune with it.
Right.
And everyone would be in tune with it. And if you're not in tune, it would create a little dissonance. And so then if we're cultivating that listening, we would hear that dissonance, and it gives us more space to like bring it more in alignment so that we're there to harmonize, if you will, to keep that metaphor going with whoever's sharing. And so that's holding the space. Again, it's an often repeated phrase, but it's so powerful in a yoga practice. And in the context of a yoga class, it's very clear how that can get started. I mean, you go into that space, there's a room, there's someone who's going to be leading the practice, the teacher. Everybody gets in their spot. There's, kind of a protocol that happens, and maybe, occasionally something like dissonant does occur in that, but that's pretty rare because there's that intention behind it. Like most people probably, can't speak for everyone,
Yeah, right.
Most people aren't going to a yoga class and thinking like, I'm going to be disruptive. Like that's not the intention behind it. So there's a great little filter there that like, if you're stepping into that space, you're going with the intention of practicing in community with others. And yeah, just hold, but in the context of like around the fire, like, or any sort of workshop where they're sharing, which comes back into that expression. It's different in the context of like, well, now everyone's listening to you, like this participant in the workshop. And that unburdening, that ability to just let it out. I think that like comes up, with our friends and our loved ones a lot too. Like, I know for me, I've definitely called friends, and most of the time when I call a friend, it's not for that friend to solve a particular problem for me. It's just to be heard. And I think that is a common desire among humans, is that we want to be heard by our peers. We want to be seen. We want to be felt, because that's reflective of reminding us that we're existing. It reminds us that we're here. And that's really what holding space is all about, is giving room for that experience, giving space.
Right. Giving room for that experience. I really love that you said it like that, because I think that's what we did. I think that's what you do, that you are in a space, you're in an environment that no one's giving you the solution. No one's telling you what to do. No one's solving the problem for you. You're just doing what animals do when they have the fight, flight, or freeze thing happen, when like a bunny's being chased by a wolf. They go through the motion, they go, they get out of harm's way, and then they realize that they weren't going to be eaten, otherwise they'd be dead, and they shake everything off, and they're not worried about the bunny or the wolf anymore. They let go of everything. They shook it off. They were able to release it without anyone trying to fix it. And then you just move on.
Exactly.
Do you think that goes back to maybe having a healthy nervous system, and maybe yoga is kind of an outlet for us to be an environment where we are learning how to embody what is known as holding space for ourselves through the yoga journey? And this is why maybe more male identified students as well as men are coming to yoga more now than I've seen before lately. And by the way, cover of Yoga Journal this month, somewhere around here, has a man on it.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Big smile.
Yeah, I think like
I mean, that's why our yoga mats are so
nervous system,
sacred.
yeah, like the nervous system is definitely something that's a part of it. Like we all have stressors, right? I think actually there's a whole another conversation that I think that we can have of like stigma around mental health in our culture, but also in the yoga community. Like the fact that doing these practices isn't going to make it so that you're never stressed or anxious. It's not.
Right.
Like these practices are acknowledging that those feelings are there, and they might fit within the framework of a larger therapy to get us to a place of equilibrium. Like I think that that's one thing that I also see in the like dominant culture of yoga in the United States is often a repression around mental health and how it can truly be holistic and aspects of, you know, a whole broad spectrum of things. And unfortunately, there's another pressure there of like denying that, to potentially denying all these other avenues to ourselves in lieu of like, no, like I'm a yogi, so therefore I have to just like eat granola and and breathe, and that'll solve all my problems. And it's you know, or whatever like the marketing,
meditate all day long, and
whatever like the marketing of the industry is telling us to do. And I don't think that for the record, I don't think there's like a, you know, evil like puppet master behind the strings that's like, we're going to
this is what
get
you're
them
doing.
to buy this, and then like, no, I don't think that's the case either. I'm just saying that like there's pressures all around of like to fit in to this group, and that there's all kinds of different avenues we can go to. But I do believe that meditation and the practice of yoga is a piece of the puzzle that at the very least will give us the space just to recognize like, oh, look, I'm having patterns of anxious thoughts here. Let me breathe into that. Like, let me work on some pranayama that's going to bring some calming energy into that. Bring me more into the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're utilizing that physiological response through meditation, which has been observed, to try and steer the body-mind mechanism in the right direction. But that doesn't mean that like there aren't like therapies that might like exist with that. Doesn't mean that perhaps even like medications or other things that are there that are a piece of that, because each person's different. Our biological makeup is different. And so we might have different impediments to more mental well-being. And unfortunately, there's stigma even in yoga that that presses into a certain way.
It sure does.
So I think that's a whole separate conversation. But yeah, like just giving the space to acknowledge that those feelings are there is the first step in finding other remedies, finding what we need to move into that state of equilibrium. And it reminds me of just this conversation here. This thread reminds me of a shloka that we would sing in the ashram, and it was Laye sambodaye chittam vikshiptam samaye punaha sakashaya vijaniya smam praptam nachalayet. And it translates to when the mind is agitated, I'm paraphrasing that because I don't remember the exact words, but when the mind is agitated, may it move to a space of calmness. And when the mind is lethargic, may it become energized, eventually finding a state of balance. And when that state is found, may we never leave from that place again. Of course, we're always going to, and then we can readjust.
Create those new patterns with the new tools that we acquire to get to the space of homeostasis that yoga and quantum physics and science has been actually steering us in this direction. So this is not a surprise. The yogis knew about this for years already, and we were just kind of like picking on it now.
The words might be a little different, but and of course, because first of all, it's a different language, but secondly, our understanding of the mind, our understanding of just so not just the psychology, but the biology. And when I say our understanding, I don't really mean my understanding. I mean just collective.
Absolutely, totally get it.
I don't know, but our collective understanding, it's grown, so we can see all that. And I think where that also fits into conversations around male identities and yoga is we can also see in our culture and the dominant culture just through statistics of drug abuse, statistics of suicide, statistics of everything that's behind that, and the reasons to why men might not be seeking that help for their mental health. Right. I think that they're all part of like the same like cosmic yarn knot that we can slowly start to untangle. But those impediments are there. It's like it becomes very difficult it becomes an act of like true courage to step into that space.
Do you find that around the fire is a space, and your class is really what you create through what your offerings are, is an environment where you can have the student be able to express themselves freely and creatively and be able to explore those areas that they've once kind of shied away from based on these stigmas?
I found in Around the Fire, and I've done Around the Fire at Omega with Justin Ramdas, and then I really started like moving it into the direction of courses right when the pandemic happened. I was lucky enough to get like 2 meetings of 2 different groups before we shut everything down for those in-person meetings, and I've been working on getting it started up again soon. But I found that in those circumstances, when men came to that space, they came to that space to share and to listen and to be. And I think it was powerful. Like for me, it was powerful. Obviously, I hope it was powerful for the participants in it, but I know I can speak from my experience. Exactly. For me, it was powerful to share like myself, but it was also powerful just to see others step into that wholeheartedly, completely wholeheartedly. And in my work in other workshops and in my retreats, I've always found that like people, when given the space to be, to feel, and to express, it just happens. It just happens quite naturally. And you see catharsis in another, and it reminds you of your own. You see the complex feelings of being human in another, and it reminds you of your own. And in that way, when you're sharing, you have this compassion that's there, and you're cultivating the compassion through having the opportunity to truly look at how complex the makeup of our individual beings are, and so how complex the makeup of others are as well. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's a good moment to segue into that bit that we talked about last time, with the only way to know the mind of another is to know your own. And that came out of like a really influential text for me. It came out of this really old novel called Rasselas, Prince of Abyssinia, and it's, the general story is like this prince and his sister and the court philosopher traveling around and looking for happiness. And so they like move to different places and assume different identities, more or less. Again, that wasn't the language that was used at that time, but to look at it from our lens, like assumed different identities, searching for happiness, and ultimately came to the understanding that like you find it in here. There was a point, that line that I had mentioned came up when they were living in Cairo as like a merchant family, and they were attending these parties and everyone was smiling and laughing, and Rasselas was doing the same, really just putting on a front at these parties, but he felt empty inside. And so he asked Imlach, the philosopher that was with him, he said, like, everybody else looks so happy, but I feel this emptiness. What is that about? And Imlach said, if you wish to know the minds of others, first you must understand your own. And yeah, it's definitely possible that, of course, there's probably moments of happiness for all those individuals, right? But it's possible that if Rasselas was doing that he probably is not seeing the suffering that is within everyone else that's there. And the truth is, we're all suffering at different times and in different ways. So in those spaces of introspection, and when we're collectively holding that space together to really inquire within, to see, to feel, to be ourselves, and then to show that as unfiltered as we can, to be vulnerable into that space, allowing ourselves to be seen by others, we start to understand deeper layers and levels of our being. And we start to develop and cultivate compassion for others. And so it's those two things of the wisdom from our own experience and the compassion that we have. And working with them together is such an important tool, because if we just have the wisdom with no compassion, then it's not as effective. And if we just have like raw, unfiltered compassion without the wisdom to direct it properly, then we can do some ultimately well-intentioned things that have maybe not the most skillful impact on the world and on others and ourselves. And like, I just thinking of a really funny example of doing that one in my life.
Oh boy.
There's a time, yeah, a little segue here, I'll tell you. But when I was in India, I had bought a sitar, and I was really excited to bring this sitar home. And every day I was like walking on the street with the sitar, and there was this man, a homeless man on the side of the road, and every day he would like reach up and be like, look, like asking me about the sitar and wanting to play a little bit, and I would like play the sitar with him a little bit. I wasn't good at all, but we would have fun together. And it was time for me like figure out a way to ship this thing home. Like, that was the whole plan. And I had gone to the post office, and they were very insistent that it was too big. And I could have definitely figured out some other way, but like, I just gave up. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give it away. So there's that compassion. I want to give it away so that it can be useful.
Yeah.
And somebody can learn and grow with it. And I just gave it to that homeless man, which is nice and good.
Yeah.
But then I got back to like where I was staying. This was after the ashram, and I was living at this yogi's house, Karma Rinpoche, and one of my good friends had traveled to India and met me there for like the last like month and a half that I was there, and he was staying in the room next to me. So I get back and I tell him this story. He's like, Zach, you could have donated that to a school, or like he's like, you don't know what that guy's gonna do. He's like, very well, he could learn to play the sitar, and like this could bring him a lot of joy, but like, you don't know. Like, you could have thought about that a little bit more. Maybe it would have had a little bit more impact in that decision. So yeah, like having the wisdom and compassion together,
having a balance,
is important. And in these spaces of communal practice, we can really find that. I think like that's one of the big advantages to practicing in that way. I think that's something that as yoga has changed over thousands of years, moving more into that direction, it actually also is a way to balance out that wisdom and compassion with the practice, with the philosophy in and of itself, to give it the biggest impact as possible. Whereas in the past, and even still to this day, some people, some yogis might renounce the worldly life and go live in the forest, practicing under a tree, meditating. It's really beautiful and really impactful to them. And I think energetically to the space that we have. But as yoga has changed over time, and its movements of even just like the core philosophy from like, you know, yoga to the Vedas, to the Yoga Sutras, to Hatha Yoga Pradipitaka, to all of these things, all the tantric movements that are there, as it's moved into the Kriya yoga lineages, all of these things, giving it more the skills and more in line with more people, more accessible to more people, to where we are now as yoga has moved out of just its motherland of India, has moved out all across the world, like in every single country.
Oh yeah.
It's gained more accessibility, and it's a vehicle for transformation for more people. And so tying this all up to the theme of today, that vehicle, I think that the barriers to men practicing yoga is more a reflection of the dominant culture of the US than the vehicle of the practice.
Yeah.
But through that understanding, we can start to allow the vehicle to be more fluid, or to allow the space to open up a little larger, so that it's always going to be someone's choice to enter into that space. But the more that we can be conscious of, first of all, the space that exists outside that space, so in this case, the dominant culture, and why that might be inhibiting people from entering the space, like that's really where we can start to open up. And I think that's true of making yoga, or inviting more male-identified folks to enter into that space. But I think that that's also true just across all all different identity aspects of like what is making this more difficult for people to enter into. Like what is happening in the room outside the room, so to speak, that's making this more difficult. Because we can be inside that yoga room, we can be inside there saying like, yeah, we want everyone to come here, but there's a lot of compassion there, but we have to balance it out with the wisdom that allows us to create spaces of impact in the world, that allows people to feel truly welcomed, I almost said, to feel truly welcomed, to move in there and to share, to be present with one another, be present with themselves.
Yes. Zach, you're so awesome. I love talking to you all the time.
Hey, I love talking to you too.
So much fun. I want to circle back with you on another conversation because we've only got about 3 minutes left before we get to touch base with Linnell Franklin. But I wanted to circle back with you on that stigma of mental health in our own culture, as well as your connection to Bhakti yoga and how your mindset shifted, basically this mental health, mental transition, mental experience, the mental layer of the 5 koshas as we work through yoga, how that pretty much was your aha moment for you to be like, I'm going to keep my hair long and I like my beard and I'm going to go do yoga and I'm totally fine with it. And so I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you.
Yeah. So we'll have that conversation another time.
We
or do you want me to say it in 2 minutes?
If you could say it in 2 minutes, I don't think that's possible. Zach, come on.
So. I can't.
So let us know in 2 minutes though, where can we find you? What is all your social stuff? How can we register for anything in the faraway future or near future? All the things.
So the best place to follow me right now is on Instagram, and that's at Zach Jenkins Yoga. I do have a website that I'm currently working on. Each day it gets a little bit further along, but it's the greatest vehicle of challenge. I don't want to say it's the greatest. It's a tough vehicle of challenge though. But right now there's a lot of great vehicles of challenge, but hopefully that'll come up soon, and I'll release things there as far as like public classes when that becomes available again, and some courses, workshops, and eventually, like I used to do, like traveling around and doing workshops and cacao ceremonies. Definitely wanting to do that more now. Retreats, that'll all be on there. I am also working on a project with 2 friends of mine that is ultimately going to be, the dream is for it to be a center for conscious transformation, a physical place, but we're going to be starting off online, and I'm really excited about that platform. Not quite ready to speak about it specifically, but just want to make sure we have it all
the
ready
seed
to go.
has been planted. I see.
Seed has been planted. We will have something. We will have an unveiling of that in the next like month or so. But yeah, I'll hold back everything on that for the time being. But Instagram is probably the best way to follow me for the time being now.
He's being tight-lipped, folks.
It's difficult.
I love you, man. Thank you so much.
I love you too.
I'll talk to you soon. Namaste.
Namaste.